Hey, I'm Emily. Back in college, I was just cruising along, trying to get my degree and enjoy life. Then Mark showed up. He was the kind of guy you'd notice, charming in a pushy sort of way. I wasn't really into him at first, but he wouldn't take a hint. One day, he just rocked up to my parents' place. Bold move, right? He walked right up to Dad, all confidence and big smiles, and dropped the bomb. Mr. Roberts, I'm Mark. I've been seeing Emily, and I'm here because I'm serious about her. I love her. I want to be upfront with you and Mrs. Roberts about my intentions. Dad was impressed, which surprised me. I guess he liked the old school respect Mark was throwing around. Later that evening, Dad cornered me in the living room, his tone all serious. That boy Mark, he seems like a solid young man. He's got guts, showing up here, and he's straightforward. Maybe give him a shot, huh? So, I did. Against my better judgment, I went on a date with Mark. And, wouldn't you know it, he was actually kind of charming when he toned down the intensity. He was funny in his own way, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It wasn't long before I started to see him differently. The persistence paid off, I guess. We started seeing each other regularly. It wasn't like the movies, fireworks and epic kisses in the rain, but it was nice. And before I knew it, we were graduating, and Mark was on one knee in front of my whole family, holding up a ring. I said yes. It seemed like the right thing to do. Everyone was so happy, my parents were thrilled. Dad especially, he was all teary-eyed, clapping Mark on the back, saying, "Welcome to the family, son. Knew you were right for my girl." Everything moved fast after that. Marriage, a cozy house that Mom and Dad helped us pick out, and then Alex came along. Those days were a blur of baby giggles, late nights, and trying to make our new house a home. Mark threw himself into his new business, a car repair shop. Dad bankrolled it, set him up with the latest gear. It was state-of-the-art, all gleaming chrome and fresh paint. I'd sometimes bring Alex to the shop, and Mark would show him off like he was the next best thing after power tools. "Look at my two greatest achievements." He'd laugh, tousling Alex's hair and then kissing me on the cheek. "Couldn't have done this without your granddad, buddy." Life settled into a routine. It was all about family dinners, weekend barbecues, and the occasional squabble over bills and house chores. Just regular life stuff. Alex grew up fast. Before I knew it, he was off to college, getting his own taste of freedom and leaving me behind in a house that suddenly seemed too big and too quiet. Mark's workshop, once the pride of our family, had become a bottomless pit, sucking in money and spitting out debts. Dad kept the business afloat, but each bailout drove a wedge deeper between Mark and me. It was a typical Thursday when Mark stormed in, face red and veins bulging in his neck. He'd had another meeting with Dad, and it hadn't gone well. "He's driving me nuts, Emily. Your dad, he treats me like I'm some kind of idiot. Like I don't know how to run my own business." He threw his keys on the table so hard they skidded off and clattered to the floor. I picked up the keys, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mark, he's just trying to help. We wouldn't even have the shop if it weren't for him." Mark whirled on me, his eyes narrow. "Oh, so now you're taking his side? Your dad's got you all brainwashed, thinking he's some kind of saint. He loves holding this over me, loves that he can pull the strings." As months rolled on, things didn't get any easier. Mark grew more distant, more bitter. I tried to hold on, for Alex's sake, but even he seemed to sense the tension, choosing to spend his time away from home whenever possible. One cold evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Mark slouched into the kitchen, a sneer twisting his features. "Emily, you used to be something to look at. Now, look at you." I paused, a plate half-dried in my hand, feeling like he'd slapped me. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. You've let yourself go. It's like you don't even try anymore." He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, a judge delivering a verdict I never asked for. I put the plate down, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and hurt. And what about you, Mark? When was the last time you looked at yourself? Or treated me like I'm more than just a maid or a cook? He scoffed. Please, Emily. I run a business. I'm out there every day, busting my ass. What do? You just sit around here, getting what, Mark? I snapped, cutting him off. Old? Fat? Is that what you want to say? He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the shards of our life scattered around me like the pieces of a broken dish. Alex graduated, and with pride and sorrow, I watched him pack up his life and move into his own place. He was free, chasing his dreams, while I felt trapped, tethered to a man who saw me as nothing more than a shadow of my former self. Life sometimes feels like it's hurtling at you full tilt. That's how I felt when my parents' sudden death knocked the wind right out of me. One moment they were planning a trip to Europe, the next, I was picking out their caskets. Meanwhile, Mark was already buzzing like a fly around the topic of inheritance. Emily, we need to sort out your parents' estate. It's what they would have wanted, he said, his voice slick with concern that didn't reach his eyes. I was still numb, buried in grief, but we went to see the notary. He had this grave look when he told us, at your parents' request, the first part of the will is to be announced now. The second part will only be revealed in a year. Mark's impatience was palpable. He was like a kid who couldn't wait to unwrap his Christmas presents. But the contents of the will weren't what he expected. The house, the massive, ivy-covered one that had been in my family for generations, was left to my future grandchildren and their guardians. Alex, my son, nearly whistled through his teeth when he heard. Well, that's an interesting setup, isn't it? Opens up quite the prospects. I didn't catch his drift then, too caught up in my own swirling thoughts. But it didn't take long to see what he meant. Out of nowhere, Alex showed up one day with a young woman on his arm, flashing a shiny new wedding ring. Mom, meet Laura. My wife. Oh, and she's pregnant. From day one, Laura played a cunning little game. She flitted around Mark, batting her eyelashes and pouring on the charm. Mark, you're such a talented businessman. I don't know how you manage, living with someone who doesn't appreciate you. Mark's laughter was a sound I hadn't heard in years, light and carefree. Well, Laura, we play the cards we're dealt, right? But maybe you're onto something. Their words stung, burning holes in the already fragile fabric of our family life. It wasn't long before Alex and Laura started making plans, whispering in corners, leaving me out of conversations. They acted like I was just some old furniture, too heavy to move and too dated to matter. One evening, they all dressed up and headed out, laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Where are you going? I asked, more out of habit than real interest. Dinner at Marconi's. Just a little family outing, Laura said, the word family pointed and sharp. I waited for an invitation that never came. Oh, I see. Have a nice time then. Mark just shrugged, his indifference a cloak he wore too comfortably. Don't wait up, Em. The door slammed shut, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any argument. I stood there, a fool in my own home, realizing how alone I truly was. Every time I asked Laura to lift a finger around the house, she'd look at me like I'd asked her to rebuild the engine of a car. Do I look like the maid to you? She'd scoff, before running off to tattle to Mark or Alex, who, of course, took her side without missing a beat. I'm just trying to keep the house nice, I'd protest, feeling ridiculous as I stood there, spatula in hand, defending myself in my own kitchen. Mark would just shake his head, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. Laura's carrying your grandchild, Em. Maybe cut her some slack, huh? Cut her some slack? The irony. It burned worse than the overcooked roast I pulled from the oven. Fed up with playing the unwanted extra in my own life, I started spending more time outside. Cafes became my refuge, places where the baristas knew my order and didn't care about family drama. One rainy afternoon, I bumped into an old college friend, Nora, while ducking into my favorite cafe for cover. Her face lit up when she saw me. Emily, it's been ages. Come, let's catch up over coffee. Sitting there, with steaming cups between us, Nora launched into stories of the past, laughter peppering her tales. But then, her tone shifted as she delved into a less cheerful memory. You remember that guy from college? The one who was always chasing after the rich girls? She asked, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I shook my head, a sense of unease creeping in. Well, he ended up marrying some girl. Had her totally fooled. The poor thing thought he was in love, but all he wanted was her money. Heard he made her life quite miserable. Nora continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. A cold realization washed over me. The way Nora described him, the pieces clicked, a picture of Mark forming clearly in my mind. My heart sank. I steered the conversation away, not ready to face that truth just yet. Heading home, the words echoed in my mind. I needed to know the truth from Mark himself. I found him in the living room, lazily flipping through a magazine. Mark, we need to talk, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. I met Nora today, and she... Is it true, Mark? Did you marry me for my money? He sat up, eyes locking on mine. Emily, let's be honest. You were a good match, a convenient one. I had debts, and you, well, you had a solution. I recoiled, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and, oddly, relief. The truth was out. For the first time in a long time, I saw my situation for what it was, a sham. Life took another sharp turn as Mark announced we were moving. Not just any move, but to my parents' old house, the one that wasn't even supposed to be ours yet. And the kicker? He didn't even bother to ask me, he just laid it out like I was an afterthought in my own life. We're moving to your parents' place. All of us, Emily. It'll be better there, especially with the baby coming soon, Mark said nonchalantly over breakfast. I almost choked on my coffee. What? But why wasn't I part of this decision? It's my family home, Mark. Mark's reply was cold, a verbal slap. Honestly, Em, when have I ever needed your opinion for anything important? I've been waiting for a chance to get out of that cramped house and enjoy life a bit. Your parents' death just sped things up. I was speechless, the audacity of his words winding me. And then, the bombshell, he'd sold our house. I've already handled it. Sold the house. Bought myself a new car, one for Alex and Laura too. We're going to live a little, Emily. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Not just left out, but completely discarded. The next few weeks were a blur as we packed up a lifetime and moved into the sprawling house I'd grown up in. The house felt different, colder, as if it too was shocked by the audacity of unwelcome guests. Laura, now heavily pregnant, had taken the role of queen in the castle. She directed where things should go with a dismissive wave of her hand, treating me more like a clumsy maid than the lady of the house. Once the baby was born, a boy with big blue eyes, things got even worse. Laura handed him to me like I was the nanny. Here, take him. I need to rest. And could you tidy up a bit? It's starting to look like a pigsty in here. Life settled into a painful routine. I was up at all hours, not just with the baby, but with all the chores Laura kept piling on me. One particularly hard day, as I was elbow deep in laundry and baby formula, I finally snapped. Laura, can we talk? I asked, as politely as I could manage through gritted teeth. She looked up from her phone, annoyed at being disturbed. What is it now, Emily? I'm your mother-in-law, not your servant. I can help with the baby, but you need to do your part around here too. It's your home as well. Laura laughed, a sound as cold as the February frost. My part? I am doing my part, Emily. I'm raising the next generation. Isn't it enough that I allow you to stay here? Allow me? This is my parents' house, Laura, not yours. The words burst out of me, fueled by months of frustration and resentment. She stood up, her face twisted in anger. This house is for the guardians of my child, which seems to be only me at this point. Maybe if you behaved better, you'd be more than just an inconvenient guest in your own home. The air was thick with tension that night at dinner, the kind you could almost see, like heat shimmering off pavement. We all sat there, pretending to care about the meal, but the real main course was about to be served by Mark, and I could tell it wasn't going to be palatable. "I've had enough, Emily. This charade has gone on too long," Mark blurted out, his fork clanging against his plate as he set it down for emphasis. The room went silent, all eyes on us. I could feel Laura's smug gaze, like a vulture circling its prey. "What are you talking about, Mark?" I asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. He slid an envelope across the table. "I'm talking about this. Divorce papers. I've signed them. It's over, Emily." I stared at the envelope, a sense of relief mingling with my shock. Relief because, deep down, I knew it was long overdue. But the way he did it, so publicly, so heartlessly, it stung. I picked up the papers, the words blurring before my eyes. "And where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Not my problem anymore. Pack your things. The house belongs to my grandson, and frankly, you're just taking up space," he said, his words like daggers. Laura smirked from across the table, her earlier faux sweetness gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. "Finally, some peace around here," she whispered loud enough for only me to hear. Alex, my own son, said nothing. He just stared down at his plate, his silence a betrayal that hurt more than Mark's harsh words. I stood up, the scrape of my chair sounding unnaturally loud. "Fine. I'll go." My voice was calm, but inside, a storm was raging. I left the dinner table with as much dignity as I could muster and started packing up years of my life into a few boxes and suitcases. That night, I checked into a hotel, feeling more alone than I ever had. The next morning, I was up early, driven by a restless energy. I needed advice, a plan. So, I went to see a lawyer. As fate would have it, I ran into Nora there. Her face was lined with worry, and when she saw me, she rushed over. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Her voice was thick with concern. "I could ask you the same," I replied, forcing a small smile. She sighed, pulling out a photo from her purse. "It's my son, he's in trouble. His bride-to-be left him, and she's pregnant. He wants to find her, take responsibility for the child." She showed me the photo, and my heart nearly stopped. The woman in the picture was Laura. That's Laura," I stammered, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening certainty. "She's married to my son, and she's just had a baby." We sat down, and I poured out everything, the dinners, the snide remarks, the divorce. Nora listened, her expression growing darker with each word. "This changes everything," she said finally. "We need to find out the truth." A few days later, I returned to the house under the guise of picking up some last items. While there, I managed to take a hair from the baby's brush, careful not to raise any suspicions. The wait for the DNA results was excruciating, but when they finally came, they confirmed our suspicions. Alex was not the father. The real father was Nora's son. I decided to meet tomorrow with those who recently betrayed me. Walking into that house, my heart thumped loud enough to echo off the walls of my childhood home. Nora was beside me, her presence a steadying force. As we stepped into the living room, the shock on Mark's face was almost worth everything I'd been through. Mark tried to play it cool, a smug smile spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't Nora. Still chasing after me? I got what I wanted. Married a rich fool," he said, nodding at me, his smile faltering as he sensed the shift in the air. "That's where you're wrong," I said, feeling the power of the truth in my hands. "First, let's talk about your precious new family," I continued, turning towards Alex and Laura, who were watching the exchange with growing unease. Laura's eyes darted around, looking for an escape as Nora stepped forward. Laura here wasn't just looking for a happy family. She was after the money, wasn't she? Nora's voice was icy as she pulled out the DNA test results. Laura's face paled. "What is this?" Alex asked, his voice trembling as he took the papers from Nora. They're proof, Alex. Proof that you're not the father of Laura's child, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Laura's facade crumbled as her deception was revealed. She snatched her bag from the floor. You can have my son for yourself, Nora. I don't need a beggar's child. She stormed out, her exit as dramatic as her entrance into our lives had been. With Laura gone, I turned back to Mark, who was watching the scene unfold with dawning horror. And now, for the second act, I said, pulling out the second part of my parents' will. Mark's eyes were wide as I unfolded the document. According to this, everything you thought you'd get by tossing me aside, you lose. The apartment worth $450,000, all to me. The business you love so much, also mine. My father never trusted you. He made sure I'd be protected. Oh, yes, you get our house, but you've already sold it. Mark fell to his knees, his face crumpled. Emily, please. I didn't mean. You did, Mark. And now you face the consequences, I interrupted, my voice firm. Alex, who had been silent, finally spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. So wrong. His apology was a balm, but it couldn't erase the years of betrayal. I know, Alex. I hope you find your way, I said, my voice softer. I turned to Mark. Get out, Mark. You and the empire of lies you built at my expense. It's over. He tried to plead, but I was done. Done with the lies, the manipulation, the pain. As they left, the house felt different, emptier, but somehow fuller too. I stood in the silence, the weight of the past years beginning to lift. I had no grandchildren, that much was clear. And the house, this massive, echoing house, was mine alone now. I had lost much, but I had gained my freedom, my future. Living in the apartment my dad left me feels like I'm in a different world. It's quiet, just the hustle of the city below and the occasional clink of my paintbrush against the jar as I sit by the huge windows, canvas in front of me. I found peace here, peace that was missing for so long in the chaos of what my life had become. I sold Mark's car repair shop last month. The guy who bought it seemed eager, full of plans to turn it around. I didn't feel a thing as I signed it over, just the smooth slide of the pen across the paper and then, freedom. As for the family house, it's rented out to a nice couple with 2 young kids. They send me photos of them playing in the backyard, the same one I grew up in, and it feels right. They're filling it with laughter again, something that house deserves. I'm doing things I never had the chance to before. Painting, mostly landscapes and still lives. There's something soothing about mixing the colors, about the first stroke on a blank canvas. And dancing, I started salsa classes on a whim. The first day I walked in, I felt ridiculous, a middle-aged woman among all those young folks. But once the music started, none of that mattered. It's just rhythm and movement, and for an hour, my worries melt away. Nora and I meet up often. It's funny how life circles back around. Her grandson, the one I thought was my blood, is growing fast. I still see him sometimes. Nora brings him around, and we go to the park or just sit in my apartment, playing with the array of toys I keep stocked up. Look at him, Emily, Nora said last time they visited, her eyes twinkling as the boy toddled around, babbling to himself. Can you believe how fast he's growing? I laughed, handing him a soft, stuffed bear. They grow up too fast, don't they? But it's good, watching them take on the world. Sometimes, I see Mark around town. Last time, he was at a newsstand, just selling newspapers. Our eyes met for a second. There was no anger left in me, no sorrow. He looked away first, but I kept walking, my head held high. As for my son, Alex, we talk sometimes. It's not what it was, and maybe it never will be, but there's hope. He mentioned a girl he's been seeing, someone he says is different from Laura, someone kind and with a good heart. Mom, I'm taking it slow this time, he told me over the phone last week, his voice tentative. I really like her, and I want to do it right. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. That's good, Alex. I'm glad. She sounds wonderful. There's hope that one day, he'll settle down properly, find someone who loves him for him. And if they give me grandchildren, well, the family house will be there, waiting to be filled with love and laughter again.